Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here and welcome back to the railway. Today I'm reviewing a Great Western steam locomotive by Hornby. Today's model is interesting because it's one of the earliest Great Western 460 locomotives to have been made available in model form. In fact, it's so early that it predates the Big Four era. So today's loco is actually a pre-grouping locomotive, which I like a lot. My example, unfortunately, is not pre-grouping. Mine is in a BR livery, so it's obviously much later. And it would be quite difficult for Hornby to produce this model in truly original condition because the prototype of today's class was originally built with a completely different wheel configuration. But nevertheless, there's lots of different versions of this model that have been made available over the years. So today's loco is this. It is the Great Western Star class, which really was the precursor to so many of the much larger and more refined Great Western 460s that you'll probably be familiar with. So currently the latest version of this model from Hornby has sold out on their website. I believe the latest RRP for this was £217.99, although it is still available at certain retailers for between £160 to £170. That seems to be about the current price. I bought my example back in 2016 for £67.50. Now that was in the sale, but obviously that is significantly cheaper than these are made available today. But I thought since this model is still available and since Hornby do keep bringing it back into the range, it'd be worth casting a fresh glance over this model, review it by 2024 standards and see whether it's worth the money and worth picking up. So hopefully you'll enjoy this review. A classic Hornby loco. This was released for the first time in 2013, so it's just over 10 years old now. Let's see what it's like and let's see if it's worth getting. Here we go. Alright, so it's been a long time since I last reviewed a Hornby Star class, so I'm eager to revisit this and see what this is like. I don't remember an awful lot about it. Obviously, as a model first released in 2013, it's going to be quite tricky for this to compare favourably against more recently released 460s from the Great Western. I'm mainly thinking about the Manners from Dapol and Acura scale. But then again, with the latest RRP for this Hornby Star class of £217.99, this is much more expensive than those models from Dapol and Acura scale. So really, it should match them in quality and detail at the very least, but we'll see. Let me show you the end of the box then. So the specific version I've got is R3229. It is the BR460 Star Class British Monarch. And this is DCC ready, and I believe it has an 8-pin DCC socket in the tender. And as you can see, mine is a later example. It's got the BR early crest. However, it's still got all of the lining on it, which is why I went with this one. I do like the more complex liveries. Let me show you the back of the box then. So for such an early loco, it was relatively powerful, classified as a 5P there. And then in the middle of the box, there's a brief history. Feel free to pause and read that if you'd like to. And then sadly on the other end of the box, no drawings from Hornby this time. We've just got a photo of one of the real things. But I suppose it's quite nice to see the real thing. Anyway, let's open this up then and take a fresh look at the Star class. Let's open up the box. And there it is inside. Yeah, quite a small loco compared with some of the later 460s. I mean, put this next to a King or a Castle and you really can tell the difference. It's a much slimmer looking loco too. Okay, let's pull this out, the blister pack and the instruction booklet. Here we go. So this is the operating and maintenance instructions for the Hornby Star class. What have we got? So basic lubrication, just the crank pins there and the axles. Assembly, that shows you how the loco and tender are connected physically and electrically. That's the standard Hornby solution. Body removal shows you how to get into both the loco and the tender. It's nice and easy. You do have a close coupling on this model. That's again a fairly standard Hornby feature. And it is DCC ready. You can see there is the 8-pin DCC socket in the tender, where there is room for a speaker, although I'm not sure that one has been pre-fitted. Probably not. And then on the back, a little bit about where the brake rigging goes on both the loco and the tender. And that is all she wrote. So with that, let's have a look at the accessories. And yeah, looks like quite a large accessories pack on this loco. So let's see what you get. Yeah, quite a lot. So first of all, NEM coupling for the front of the loco. Painted cylinder drain cocks, they look nice and detailed. Brake rigging as promised for the loco and tender. And then we've got some painted vacuum pipes for the loco buffer beam and the tender buffer beam. So nice and simple, but plenty of accessories for you to add if you want. Okay, let's take a look at the finish on this loco then. Here we go. And there it is. Noticeably, yeah, quite a bit more plasticky looking than some later models. Now, on Hornby's latest releases of this model, I believe they have not retooled it or updated it in any way. However, bear in mind that my example was made quite a long time ago. I bought this in 2016. If you were to buy a more modern Hornby release of this, well, the detail of the model I would expect to be the same. I think if it's decorated to more modern standards, you could expect to see a better finish than this. I don't know that because I haven't tried a later Hornby Star Class, but to be fair to Hornby, that's what I would expect. The finish could be a little dated on mine. But otherwise, the decoration is really beautiful on this. We've got tons of lining, as you can see, and from a first glance, it does seem to be done very precisely. I will, of course, get some close-ups on that later. Okay, lifting up. And yeah, the loco itself is actually decently heavy. There isn't any metal in the body construction as far as I know, so the boiler is just plastic, unlike the Acura scale manner, and the running plate is plastic, unlike the Dapol manner. But I think the chassis must be quite a substantial one in here because the weight really isn't that bad at all, and I will pop this on the scales in just a second to let you know what this weighs. But yeah, it's a beautiful little loco, this, very quaint. One of the smaller 460s you can pick up. I'll have to put this next to some of the other smaller ones. But yeah, it's a small loco. I do enjoy smaller locos generally. And I also really enjoy pre-grouping locos, which is why I like to come back to the Star Class. But yeah, there it is, looking fantastic. Let's have a brief history of the Star Class in real life, and then we'll take a much closer look at this model. The Great Western Star Class, also known as the 4000 class, was an early design of four-cylinder 460 locomotive designed by George Jackson Churchward for express passenger work. 73 were built between 1906 and 1923, although the first was actually built as a 442 Atlantic and then later on converted to a 460. The design was capable of up to 90 miles per hour, no mean feat really for such an early locomotive. We call this the Star Class, but only around 10 locomotives, built in 1907, were officially part of the Star series. Subsequent batches were given different names such as Knight, Queen, Prince and Abbey. These later builds were essentially the same thing but with some detailed differences. This example, British Monarch, is actually part of the King series of 1909. From the mid-1920s onwards, 15 examples were dismantled and the resulting parts were used for the Newcastle class. Otherwise, withdrawal of the stars took place between the early 1930s and 1957, with only one star preserved today, that's Lodestar. The rest were sadly cut up and scrapped. So there she is, up close and personal for you, Hornby's Star Class. And first things first, yeah, the level of detail on this model is excellent. It's a very, very nicely produced model. However, it is not produced to the same high standard as more recent locos, such as the Dapol Manor or the Acura scale Manor. And of course, the most recent version of this Hornby Star Class was much more expensive than those models. And in fact, quite how Hornby can charge way over £200 for this now with a straight face, I don't know. Now, like I say, bear in mind, Hornby have not retooled this Star Class locomotive, nor have I seen them announce any upgrades to the model. So if you were to buy one of the more recent Star Class locos, it would be the same model that you see right here, except, like I say, I'd expect to see it decorated to more modern standards. So let's start by talking about the weight. Now, when I lifted this up out of the packaging, yeah, I said this felt pretty good and heavy, and it does. The loco in particular does feel quite hefty. But the body is plastic and the running plate is plastic, like I say, and so it doesn't really hold up against the Mana class locos that I talked about. And because the running plate is made of plastic rather than sturdier metal, you can see that where the running plate is thinnest, because it's been cut away slightly to accommodate the cylinders, it is warping very noticeably. And I don't think you need my ruler to demonstrate that, but I'll put it here anyway, just to kind of show how serious that warping is. So yeah, it's really not the best on quality. Pity not to see a little bit more metalwork on this model, given how much it now costs. So it weighs in at 335 grams. That's 16 grams lighter than the smaller Dapol Mana class, and it's 74 grams lighter than the Accurascale Mana class, because that loco of course had the die-cast boiler. So quite plasticky, I think, for a loco that now costs over £200. The finish on my example isn't the best. I would expect this to be better, at least on a more modern release. Yeah, it's quite plasticky. There's no difference in the finish of the boiler, for instance, and the smoke box. Yeah, they're absolutely the same. All of the model has been treated to a relatively matte finish. The quality of the decoration though is high. The banding on the boiler, as you can see here, this looks excellent, and there's quite a lot of lining here. We've got the lining on the splashers, which looks great. The side of the cab is beautifully lined, and this model did not come with any etched number plates, unfortunately. However, the ones that are printed onto the model look excellent. I mean, the print quality here is very high indeed. Again, no etched nameplate came with this model. However, this nameplate is actually made of metal. It's not a fully etched one in that the letters don't stand out or anything, but it is a metal piece, and the print quality once again on there is nice and high. The cylinders have got lining on them too. As you can see, all of this has been done nice and precisely. And here's a look at the front buffer beam, which is painted red, but apart from that, that's pretty much it. And then the smoke box as well has the running number and shed code printed onto there. And we've also got this little separately painted valve as well, which is a very tiny separately fitted part. Let's talk about some of the details then. So the wheels are nicely presented here. These are your typical Hornby wheels, so moulded plastic with a metal tyre fitted to them. And the advantage of this is that they do have the realistic axles, which looks great. The coupling and connecting rods look wonderful on this as well. We've actually got quite a few cast parts here. We've got an absolutely massive crosshead here, and these sliders are pretty large as well, as per the prototype. And because these are cast, there's a real sense of weight with these. In terms of the buffer beam, we do have metal sprung buffers, so there you go, it's a nice touch. And there is a pipe pre-fitted to the buffer beam, although there are no screw-link couplings provided with this model, which is a pity. Along the running plate, we do have lamp brackets. As you can see, those are nice and fine, and all of the rivets are presented on the running plate, which looks great. We've got various pipework fitted to the smoke box here. These little levers are separately fitted above the running plate as well. And over on the other side, there is a reverser rod, which is made of metal. That's a nice quality piece. And there's quite a bit of other separately fitted pipework over on the other side as well. The loco has separately fitted metal handrails, and these are extremely fine. Absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. And the smoke box door has the handle separately fitted. That's very nice and straight. And the lamp bracket above there is also a separate part. Unfortunately, the chimney is just painted plastic. The quality of the paint is pretty high actually, although again we have seen better on other models where that chimney part is real polished copper or possibly just higher quality paint. And the same is true with the safety valve bonnet here, just painted plastic unfortunately. The quality of the moulding is excellent, but the quality of the paint I have seen better. In fact, I've seen models where this part is electroplated and that looks much better. The whistles again are just made of plastic. The moulding quality is absolutely fine, but again they just suffer a little bit in terms of finish. And then around the cab we've got glazed windows which look great. There is pipework behind the cab steps here which gives you a nice sense of depth, and the cab interior is pretty impressive. Now this is quite an exposed cab, so the detail here is absolutely necessary. There are lots of different components and separately fitted parts represented here, which is great. We've even got this separately fitted tender full plate, although unfortunately it's fixed at this rather unrealistic angle. So yeah, that's not the best. And there are no details on the gauges, for example. That's something that you do see on more modern locos. And there's no lighting on this model either, so there's no firebox flicker effect or anything like that. Otherwise though, the model is beautifully detailed. I think the level of detail is perfectly acceptable by 2024 standards. I mean, look, even between the frames there's a representation of the valve gear. So the only things that really make this worse off than more recent releases are, first of all, the price. This is more expensive now than some better quality and better detailed models. The quality and the construction, this is quite plasticky and this does show through in the weight. And then I think special features like extra cab detail and lighting, that kind of thing. Yeah, this model is lagging behind a little bit there too. Let's take a quick look at the tender then, which is similarly well detailed. It's got the same finish on the body and the lining is the same as well. Good quality lining, and here's a closer look at the early British Railways crest, which is a beautiful print. The underframe has a fair bit of detail to it as well. Most of this is moulded, but it looks good. Obviously, you can fit brake rigging here if you want to, and there is a pre-fitted water scoop on this tender as well. Here's a look at the detail and controls on the front of the tender. Quite a bit of complexity here. It's even got these tiny little metal separate buffers between the loco and tender. I do love attention to detail like that. And the coal load is nice and realistic as well. I would say again that is pretty much up to modern standards. Unfortunately, round the other side of the tender there's this pretty nasty crack in the body here, and this was here when I first got this model. And I did actually contact Hornby about this, and it sounded like they were going to help me out and get a replacement body for me. They did respond to my message. They asked me for the product code for my star class, and I responded with that information, and that was the last I heard. They never got back to me. So yeah, on this occasion it was poor customer service from Hornby, and you do hear quite a bit about how Hornby don't stock proper spares and that kind of thing. Well, I don't know whether that was true or not on this occasion because they just stopped responding. Hence why I've still got a cracked tender on my star class today. Plenty of detail around the back of the tender as well. These steps on the back are separately fitted, as are the various different handrails. And then we've got a similar buffer beam with the vacuum pipe pre-fitted and also sprung buffers. The coupling is fitted to the back of the model, although it's not kinematic, it's just free to pivot left and right slightly, but I would say that is perfectly adequate. So yeah, I think the level of detail is really excellent. That is great. Like I say, it's lagging behind a little bit in features and quality, and I don't quite understand the latest prices for this, but otherwise it is a beautiful looking model. And to be fair, some of the retailers these days are selling the Star Class brand new for £160 to £170, which is about the same price as the Acura scale Manor. Now, like I say, value for money, they're not the best because this is quite a bit behind the Acura scale Manor, but that is certainly more reasonable than the full RRP of nearly £220. So with that, let's get this down onto the track. Let's test the performance, let's take a look at the mechanism, and we'll see how all of this compares to more recent releases. So first, as promised, here's a bit of a size comparison, and I have to apologise to you because the Star is actually quite a bit larger than I realised. So the loco closest to you at the front is the Manor class, which is a lot smaller than I realised compared with the others. I mean, it doesn't seem it because the recent Manor models have been so heavy, but yeah, those are small. The next loco back is the Grange, which is slightly larger, and then the Star class, which is pretty large, really, compared to the other two. It's only when you start looking at the likes of the King class, the one at the back there, that the Star starts to look pretty small and slender. So yeah, smaller than I realised, and this should give you an idea of how it sizes up to other models. Anyway, here it is down onto the track, looking excellent. I do love the Star. And before I show you the performance, I am going to talk about the mechanism. So first, in terms of pickups, this model is awesome. It's got pickups on the tender wheels, so you've got 3 per rail there, and then you've got wiper pickups on the loco driving wheels, bringing the total up to 6 pickups per rail. That's really good. The drawbar is Hornby's standard drawbar design, so it's fixed with screws, and then electrically there's a wire and plug going between the two. That's fairly standard, does work well. The base keeper plate is fully removable, so you take these screws out and the whole thing pops off so that you can clean the pickups, so it's nice and serviceable. Unfortunately though, there are no separate bearings on the driving axles. In fact, if I pull one of the axles out of position, you can see that it sits into a square slot in the metal chassis, which seems very cheap and nasty for Hornby. This is actually very rare for a Hornby loco. Most of the time they do fit the proper bearings. But this model comes from around 2013, and this was the time when Hornby tried stripping back the complexity of their models, and frankly customers didn't take too kindly to that, because for the most part Hornby still wanted to charge a lot of money for the models. So I think this is probably related to that, and it is quite disappointing. Now obviously I can only speak for the example that I have here. I don't actually know whether a newer Hornby Star Class will have the proper bearings in it. I can say that I've not seen Hornby announce that they've upgraded the mechanism on this in any way, but I don't know for sure. So if you've got a more recent Star Class, or if you've got one that does have bearings on it, please do let me know and I will update. But as far as I know, this feature is going to be consistent regardless of which Hornby Star you get. Like I say though, could be wrong. It is the centre axle that is driven on here, so it's just a single driven axle, and that's pretty much it. Body removal is nice and simple with this one. You just pull out the front body screw. I undid the rear screw where the drawbar is, but that actually wasn't necessary. You just need to undo the front screw underneath the bogie. And here is the heavy metal chassis. Despite the plastic construction of the body, this thing is quite chunky, so that's where the weight comes from. There is a 5-pole motor inside, which is great to see, but unfortunately there is no flywheel. A bit confusing given the size of the loco. And yeah, as you can see, if I pull off the gear cover, you can see there is no flywheel here, which is a little bit of a pity. And yeah, that's it really for the loco chassis. No speakers, no lighting, nothing like that. Pretty bare bones. In terms of the DCC socket then, to access this you need to remove the tender body. And to do this, you just remove the 2 self-tapping screws from either side of the tender, and that reveals the 8-pin DCC socket on the inside. I do know that Hornby haven't upgraded this because the latest listings still say 8-pin on this loco, so that's something they certainly don't seem to have upgraded. And while there is space for a speaker inside the tender here, none has been fitted, so if you wanted to chip this with sound, you'd have to provide your own speaker. And then the gauging is quite loose actually. It comes in at 14.1 to 14.2 millimeters back to back, which is a little bit away from the standard, although it doesn't derail on curves or points or anything like that. So that's the mechanism. Yeah, not the best by modern standards, and frankly even in 2013 Hornby had produced far better mechanisms than this. I think it was a more conscious decision to strip a few features back to save on the cost. But fortunately Hornby have since abandoned that strategy, and newer locos are better quality as well. Anyway, performance then. Let me show you how this loco runs. Does it work? Yeah, as you can see, you might have noticed that wasn't a dreadfully smooth start, and yeah, that is a theme with this, and that's not just me on the controller either. And I guess the main reason is because it's quite a fast loco, so if I run past at 50% speed, so half power, you might see what I mean. Ready? Yeah, it's a fast one. That's half power, and if I hit it with full power, it's even crazier. Ready? So yeah, gearing, not really the smartest on this thing. The top speed in real life would be about 90 miles an hour. I'm pretty sure this model's going much faster than that at full speed. And yeah, because the gearing favours the higher speeds, the crawls really aren't the best. So if I attempt to crawl now, you'll see what I mean. So I'm turning it up very slowly. It is able to go quite slow, which is surprising, but I find that it's not dreadfully smooth. So you can see the centre wheel starting to turn there. You can see it started moving slowly there, but then it stalled, so you have to turn it up a bit more. And it kind of moves in spells and then stops. So you keep turning, and then it gets to about this stage where it starts jerking forwards and stopping and then jerking forward. So it's like it's almost crawling, but it's a little bit too coggy to manage it. But admittedly, it is very slow. And then keep turning it up. And then, yeah, it's still a little bit coggy there. Keeps stopping periodically, but ultimately it gets smoother from that point on. Keep turning it up. and then once you get to here, it's, you know, perfectly good. No flywheel, of course, so yeah, you don't really get the output of the motor smoothened very much. But it's pleasing enough. I think to say that it's got no proper bearings in it, the performance isn't so bad. Obviously, if it did have bearings, then the drag would be reduced heavily, and I think the motor would possibly be able to perform better at slow speeds. But yeah, as it is, it's just kind of fighting against quite a bit of drag. And, you know, it's not a light loco either. That chassis is pretty hefty, so there is going to be a bit of drag in those axles for sure. But it's all right. Yeah, it's not bad. It runs a little bit quick. The torque, I think, is okay, although, yeah, you're going to see how it performs around the curves with a load in a second. But let's try the load test here. Finger in front of the buffers, up to 50% speed. Really doesn't sound good. You hear that? Yeah, it doesn't like it, but it's certainly able to turn its wheels. They slow down quite dramatically, but yeah, it's not as though it's unable to turn them or anything. So yeah, it's not the best performer in the world. I've certainly seen worse, and I've certainly seen better. In terms of pulling power, it's actually better than expected. So it comes in at 0.38 newtons, which is not bad at all. That's about 24 coaches on straight and level track. And that is actually more than the Dapol Manor, despite the Dapol Manor being a heavier loco than this. So that's impressive. It's not quite up to the same standard as the Acura scale Manor. That is much more powerful than this. But yeah, this is about what you'd expect. It's about the same as a Hornby Lord Nelson. And incidentally, that loco could have been much more powerful too if that had more metal on board. But anyway, I've set up some ex-Great Western coaches for the starter haul. Not a huge number, just 5 of those. Obviously, this is an early loco, so you're not going to be loading it up with dozens of coaches, but I think 5 should be a good test. So with that, let's back up, see how precisely I can couple with this. Alright, so it's not going to be as precise as some. Well, maybe not though. Maybe the precision is okay. It's more just the kind of cogginess of it. Are we there? Yeah, I think we are now. So yeah, as you could see, actually pretty good on the precision. But how's it going to get on hauling them? I think 50% speed's a bit quick, so I might go for 45, just so that it's not going crazy fast. But I want to give it a fair chance of not slowing down on the curves too. So let's try this. Just less than 50, we'll go for 45 and see how that looks. Here we go. And yeah, I think that's pretty fast to be fair. Yeah, I don't think I'd want it going much faster than that. So on the middle line, we've got a loco I've talked quite a bit about today. It's the Acura scale Manor. And yeah, the mechanism in this loco suffers a little bit too, but for different reasons. Obviously, Acura scale, we're not cutting corners on this to try and make it cheaper or whatnot. But they ended up using a pretty small motor in this model, which wasn't the best, I think, in order to preserve the accuracy and realism of the model, which again made this loco suffer at the slow speeds. But in terms of the looks, yeah, that loco is way above the standard of the Hornby Star. And then on the inside line, I've got the Hornby Grange, and this is an example of a loco that is way below the Star in terms of standard. So yeah, not the greatest detail in the world. It's noticeably simpler. I think the mechanism is slightly better. I believe this one's got the bearings, but it still doesn't have the flywheel. So yeah, the Star's better than some at least. Right, let's go and catch up with it. Right, so as you can see, it's going really quick, till of course it reaches the second radius curve when it slows down quite dramatically. And I don't think that's due to the motor. The motor is actually quite a large and substantial one. I think the issue is that the gearing's not the best, so it's geared for speed rather than torque, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And of course there's a lot of friction in the mechanism because of the lack of proper bearings. So if it had the bearings, the friction would be less, and I think perhaps we'd see this slow down quite a lot less on the curves if it had them. But otherwise, yeah, the performance is fine. I have slowed it down a little bit now because I think even at 45 it was a bit quick. This means that the speed on most parts of the layout looks a lot more sensible, although of course it also exacerbates the slowing down around the second radius. So yeah, it's not ideal. The performance isn't that bad for sure, but it's just a bit frustrating that a few small tweaks would have really improved this a lot, I think, even with the same motor, you know. But yeah, overall, it's a beautiful looking model. The level of detail's really not far off where it needs to be. I mean, some of the flashier features that it doesn't have don't make much of a difference in terms of the overall look of the model, so I could forgive the lack of cab lighting and that kind of thing. I think the finish definitely could have been better, and I'd be interested to see a more recent release of this to see if that's the case. But otherwise, the physical detail for the most part is really excellent, to say this model's kind of 10 years old plus now. So yeah, it's certainly not all bad, but equally there are lots of things that would put me off this model. I think the mechanism is certainly one of them, but like most models, there's lots of pros and cons with this. And now let's have some ratings then for Hornby's Star Class. Now, I do think this is a beautiful looking model, and in fact it does have some qualities that are actually in line with modern standards. On the other hand though, more recent models have been a lot better than this in terms of the quality, features, details, etc. And so this isn't quite such a high score as I gave the Star Class last time I reviewed it. But the level of detail for me is 3.5 star. There's a lot that I like here. The moulding quality is excellent. We've got tons of riveting on the running plate, loads of moulded detail, really good. There's detail between the frames, which has been separately painted. That looks fantastic. Speaking of painting, the decoration is top quality as well. Love all the lining. The buffers are also sprung. Tons of little details like that, loads of separately fitted parts. On the downside though, the quality of the finish isn't quite what you'd expect by today's standards. The cab detail, while excellent, isn't quite up to scratch. It doesn't have detail on the gauges, no lighting in the firebox, etc. There's no etched number plates provided, there's no screw-link couplings for the coupling hooks, and a lot of the details are plastic, such as the safety valve bonnet, the top of the chimney and the whistles. If they were made of metal, the finish on those parts would have looked better, and even with the right paint, plastic parts like this could have looked better than this. Performance for me is 3 star. Now, it's not a bad performer by any means, but I have seen much better. So this is quite a fast runner. It's geared to run pretty quick, which has meant that the crawl has suffered quite a bit. It can go pretty slowly, but it's quite coggy, not the most convincing performance in the world. It also slows down quite dramatically on Gordon's Hill. Now, that's not too unusual. I've got plenty of models that do that. I've also got plenty of models that don't and are much more powerful than this. So yeah, 3 star, not a bad performer by any means. At the higher speeds it is a decent runner, but like I say, I have seen better. Pulling power, certainly not too bad, 24 coaches or 0.38 newtons. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. It's not quite as much as the Acura scale Manor, but it does compare pretty well with other Great Western 460s. The mechanism is 3 star, so again, kind of middle of the road here, upper middle of the road. It's got lots to praise here, lots of pickups on both the loco and the tender, quality motor. It's also nice and serviceable. You can access everything for cleaning and maintenance. On the downside though, no proper bearings on the driving axles. The axles sit into square slots cut into the chassis, very cheap and nasty. Good quality motor, like I say, but no flywheel, that's a pity, and no special features such as speakers or lights. It is very bare bones, so for those reasons it loses a couple of stars. The same is true for the quality really. I've given it 3.5. Overall the quality is great, the build quality is excellent, very, very well assembled, well painted, etc, etc. However, once again, plastic construction, not the best. I'd expect at the very least a die-cast running plate these days, and because that is plastic, it warps quite a bit at the weakest point. Also, again, the quality of some of those plastic parts doesn't look the highest either, so it's lost a 1.5 stars for that. Value for money then. Now, this might seem a little bit generous given the latest RRP of £217.99, but I do want to take into account the price I paid for this model, which I suppose isn't that useful because it was so long ago, but I've also got to review my experience. I can't complain about the price too much because I actually paid a pretty decent price. So I paid £67.50 for this. Obviously, that is an absolute bargain. These days though, the latest RRP is £217.99, and the retailers that still have them want £160 to £170. Now, to be clear, it is possible that Hornby have upgraded this model in some way, and if you've got a later version, please do comment down below and let me know whether they have or not. But what I do know is that they haven't retooled this, and I haven't heard of any upgrades Hornby have made, so I'm assuming that my model is going to be the same, more or less, as something released more recently. I'm 90% sure of that, although, like I say, it could be wrong, so take that with a pinch of salt. And I have to say, the latest price for this is pretty high, really, for what you get. So I'm not going to give this 5-star, but certainly if you can find one of these, perhaps second-hand in good condition, or maybe reduced sufficiently at the retailers, then yeah, the value could be okay. Overall then, that is 6.81 out of 10. Yeah, it's a slightly lower score than I've given the star in the past, but also the context has changed. A lot of years have passed since I last reviewed this, and things have moved on in model railways quite a bit. We're seeing much more complex locos than this produced now, and frankly at better prices too. So that's a grade of E. That seems a little bit harsh for a nice looking loco, but if you think about it, there's quite a few issues that I have picked up on here. And so into the logbook it goes, where it's 17th place above the EFV booster and below the Bachmann 04. I think for the right price I could recommend this. Don't be paying £200 though, or anything close. I don't think this is worth that. Alright then folks, well that will just about do it for this review. Please let me know what you thought about this. Obviously it had been a long time since I last looked at this loco properly on video, and I like to try and keep my catalogue of videos up to date, so I think this was well worth doing. I don't know whether we're going to see Hornby produce any more of these stars, or whether the remaining examples are just going to sell out and then the model will be gone for the foreseeable. But personally, if they did that, I'd be quite upset, because overall it's a great looking model. I think if Hornby did choose to bring this back though, I would expect and hope that they would upgrade it. It doesn't need a whole lot really. I don't think it would be worth their time to sort of slap lighting into the firebox. I mean, you can live without all of that. I think pop some bearings in, maybe look at redesigning the chassis a little bit to incorporate a flywheel, perhaps swap the gears as well so that it runs at a more realistic speed. I mean, these things aren't the easiest to do in the world, but equally if they're bringing the model back for 220 odd pounds, or just less than 200 at the retailers, these are the things that you would expect at the very least. So yeah, personally I don't want to see this model come back into Hornby's range without improvements, but if it did come back and they did improve it, even superficially as I've described, I think this model could still look great by modern standards. But that's what I think. Please do comment down below. If you've got a more recent star than this, let me know what it's like. Is the decoration and finish better, as I expect, or is it very much the same thing? Please do let me know. For now though, thank you very, very much for watching, and I'll catch you again on the next one. Alright, cheers folks, you take care.